BFR, or blood flow restriction training, is a training modality used by rehab therapists to apply loads as low as 20% 1RM and get strength and size increases in a load-compromised individual. So in the rehab setting, these are people that come to us after surgery. Maybe they're in pain. Maybe they're an older individual with knee-OA where we typically can't load them. But with BFR, we can put a strap or a tourniquet around their thigh or their arm, pump it up to a certain percentage of a restrictive pressure, and exercise using very, very light loads. This has become very, very popular within the rehab setting. The goal of this podcast, though, is to talk about it in the performance and healthy population. It makes total sense when we think about, load-compromised individuals and using BFR. But in the healthy population, there's a lot more variables that go into play and a lot more ideas and programming creativity that goes into how to program BFR for a healthy population. So we brought on a good friend of ours, Dr. Nicholas Rolnik of the BFR Pros, to talk all about healthy applications of BFR. You guys are going to like this one.
The Rehab audio experience will teach you how to take control of your health through knowledge by optimizing performance, promoting longevity, and keeping your movement system in tune. Welcome to your host, the Prehab Guys.
Nick, welcome. How's it going, man?
Going well. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you coming on. So Nick Rolnik, everyone. Dr. Nick Rolnik is a BFR expert and one of the BFR pros. Today we're going to talk all about BFR, but we're going to kind of niche it down a little bit and try to talk about BFR as it pertains to the average person or the fitness enthusiast, not necessarily in the rehab setting, which hopefully many of you now by following our platforms have kind of understand. So without further ado, I guess we can start with this. We'll just go brief, broad overview, Nick. Why don't you introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll just briefly talk about what BFR is, and then we'll kind of go down that fitness route.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate, again, being on here and having a platform to talk more about blood flow restriction and really how it can make a significant impact on the lives of others. And when Mario Novo and myself got together over a year ago, and we're talking about our common mission. Really, our goal is to truly make this world a better and happier place to live. And we both believe that if we can get people back to doing what they love to do, whether they're an athlete at the highest level of competition or really anybody who loves to keep active, then we'll be doing our part in our mission. We both love being physical therapists because of the relationships that we have with our patients and the ability to really just make a significant impact on their lives. And ultimately what comes down to is helping them accelerate their recovery back to doing what they love to do as quick as possible and optimizing their performance along the way. And so BFR Pros kind of came together as not just for blood flow restriction, but really for anybody to use technologies that are available that are better for results. So BFR is not BFR Pros in that it's blood flow restriction pros. It's actually better for results pros. And so utilizing technologies that are out there that are better than what we currently have are technologies that we're championing. And so blood flow restriction obviously is our flagship technology. And it's been around for 50 plus years, as you all know. And really through unbiased evidence-based research and amazing anecdotal experiences by, clients, patients, et cetera, everyone is starting to achieve really just awesome results. And so really we're just looking to help promote BFR and help really just make the world a better and happier place to live. So it all just starts with getting the message out there. And so that's kind of why I'm here right now.
100%. We have to get the message out there. We can talk all we want, amongst ourselves, but unless we're getting that message out to the people that need it, our patients, our clients, it kind of falls on deaf ears. So I'm happy that you were able to join, and hopefully we can get this message out to people. And I guess we'll start with a kind of a general question. You mentioned a little bit of what BFR is. One of the definitions, we'll go with BFR, blood flow restriction. I guess generally speaking, what is blood flow restriction? We'll start with that. What is blood flow restriction?
Blood flow restriction is using a cuff that's calibrated by some sort of technology whether that's a computer operated technology or a Doppler that allows you to pretty much restrict arterial flow and venous flow to a really a degree that you're able to control. And in doing so, when we reduce blood flow to the arm or the leg, then you're increasing what we call muscle oxygen demand. So the muscles have to work harder to generate a contraction. And when they are working harder to generate a contraction, that essentially tricks the body into building muscle mass and strength with loads that we never thought we could actually do in the clinical sense. So you can use very light loads. So, technically the recommendations are anywhere between 20 and 40, percent, give or take a couple percentage points of the 1 rep max. So that means that we're able to have individuals that might not necessarily be able to lift heavier loads are now able to do so with this technology. And that allows them to accelerate their performance and recovery back to what, where they were at, and even exceed that. And so it's really exciting because this technology can allow us to get people active and keep people active even if they're injured. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where BFR has made its staple so far, has been in the injured population. So right. People that are unable to lift heavy, they're not able to, they're post-surgical, or for whatever reason, we're not able to lift heavy from cardiovascular perspective, or just a falls, perspective. And so blood flow restriction can be used to help increase their muscle mass and strength with very light loads. But not as many people are talking about the general fitness applications that can be given through proper blood flow restriction integration and into a program. Right. So that's kind of where, where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, us as physical therapists, that's the population that we see a lot of, and I'm sure many other people in the healthcare setting see a lot of. Maybe the injured person, the post-op person, the person in a little bit of pain, where now we have this literally this cheat code where we can load these people where we typically couldn't load them and get really amazing results. And it's starting to become more mainstream. I think you would agree through conversations like what we're having today, and just through just a lot of more education, I think, around it, which is great. And I think it'll be the standard of care. What do you say? I always tell people this should be the standard of care. It should be the standard of care, but I think it's going to take some time. I tell people like 5 years within rehab. Do you agree with that, kind of timeline? Like this is going to be, if you're going to rehab, within 5 years, every rehab facility should be performing blood flow restriction training, I'd hope.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the evidence kind of speaks for itself. So, with any new technology, there's always going to be apprehension to adopt something new for fear of, consequences, safety, cost, or is a big barrier for new technology. And so with blood flow restriction, because it's been around since the mid 60s, anybody who's listening who doesn't understand how actually blood flow restriction actually came to be, it was actually this Japanese man who Yoshiaki Sato, which he was just kneeling down, and he was a bodybuilder, right? He liked to lift weights, but that's the definition of a bodybuilder, at least from the Japanese research, which is definitely not the definition of a bodybuilder from the American side. Yeah. But he considered himself a bodybuilder. I'm a bodybuilder. He considered himself a bodybuilder, and he was sitting on his knees in a kneeling position, and he started to feel this similar type of burn as he would if he was exercising his calves. And, for me, from the physical therapist perspective, when I tell this in courses, I always joke, the first thing I think of when I think of burning is sciatica in that situation. But he thought that he wanted to, he's like, let me just tie a band around my thigh and then see if I can replicate that similar feeling. And the whole was the birth of what modern day blood flow restriction, which in early days was KATSU, KAATSU. And so there's been tons and tons and tons of research that's been out there. I mean, personally, I've definitely read over 300 papers on BFR, and there's more and more every day. So really, really exciting in that this technology, while it might be new to mainstream, it definitely has been around for a long period of time. And so right now we have a decent understanding of at least the surface level physiology of what's going on, and how to build muscle. But now we're still kind of undertaking what specifically is going on underneath the hood, so to speak, in the actual environment of our muscles. But either way, it's been shown to be safe. I say this too, it's under a certified skilled provider, and that provider could literally be anybody. It could be anybody who has an understanding, who goes to a course that is that looks at the base standard of assessment for me, which is really just Doppler. At some point, you need to standardize the pressure to the individual, which we can talk about in a little bit for those that are unaccustomed to that. But as long as you meet that little baseline requirement, really, BFR is easy to use. Really, it's easy. You put it on the cuff, you put it on the limb, the most proximal part of the limb, you tie it up, you latch it up, and then you pump it up to whatever pressure. So it's really easy to use, and that means that it's hard to misuse. So you're not really, if you understand the guidelines of what you're doing, then it's really hard to abuse BFR, which is great. And it's safe, so easy to use, hard to misuse. It's safe in that there's been really at least 20 studies on safety in a variety of populations that show that it's safe to use in, again, under the guidelines of what, you should be using BFR in. It's safe and it's better for results, right? I mean, you're able to get muscle mass and strength at loads that we never thought possible. So it's really, really easy to start to integrate. It's just, we now need to bridge the gap between, research and practice. Correct. And so that's kind of what we've been doing. So I definitely think that BFR is going to be here to stay. I mean, we like to use instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization. We like to use a lot of these other modalities that really don't have a lot of strong evidence associated with their use. But blood flow restriction by far has a pretty solid base of evidence already. And we already know that. If anybody that takes one of the courses that I teach, I say, listen, if you don't take anything away from today, all you need to know is if you just slap on BFR cuffs, you take it to a relative pressure of 50%, right? Even if it's arms, legs, whatever, and you have them exercise and do the same things that you've been doing in rehab, you've just accelerated their rehab. Yep. You've just done that, because now the muscles have to work harder at that lighter load, because we're unable to, in the rehab setting, really afford the ability to get these people on any sort of periodized programming, because it's difficult. Some people see people for 20 minutes, some people see people for 30 minutes. I mean, some people like me, I'm blessed. I see people for an hour. I'm able to, think more about that. But at the end of the day, we just need to get people moving, and we need to get people increasing their muscle mass and strength, because muscle mass is a metabolic tissue. People forget that, aesthetically it looks nice. But in reality, it serves as regulators of inflammation. And so if we don't have a lot of muscle mass, then we lose that arm of our inflammation fighting. So it's really important from that end. And then not to mention the consequences of immobilization in the rehab setting, at least on muscle mass and strength, and what we call anabolic resistance, and a host of all these other negative things that we don't necessarily see, on the surface, but are happening underneath the hood. And so we can get people moving and getting them back to doing what they love to do faster with BFR. So I think that's going to be a mainstay for absolutely. I'm looking forward to it too.
100%, especially like I said, as people get more educated. I think one of the main things that you mentioned is it's not like it's some new thing that just became popular. It's not like it's some new thing that just started becoming research 2 years ago when people started hearing about it. Like you said, it's been around in the research setting for a long time. And the safety aspect of it is something that shouldn't be overlooked by any means, but it's very safe to perform as long as you know what you're doing with it. Which is so important for people to know and understand. So you hit on the rehab setting. We talked about that. We'll kind of fast forward. We know it's something, like you said, even if you didn't know anything, even if your exercise prescription knowledge is absolutely horrible, knowing that whatever you're doing in a clinic right now, if you slap some cuffs on someone, like you said, and pumped it up to that relative pressure of 50%, know that you're already doing something better than what you had been doing previously. for that individual that is load compromised. But then now taking it a step further, so say we're now going to be speaking to both all the athletic trainers, the personal trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, or just the average gym goer, the person that wants to get bigger biceps, the person that is in the gym writing their own programming. How can BFR be used for these individuals that aren't necessarily injured per se? I know we can go down a lot of different holes with this, but we'll start there and then we'll go from there.
I mean, it ultimately comes back to what is your goal. So for me, I never think of prescription without a goal. So I really need to know what that individual's goals are. So we're very fortunate, the BFR pros, myself and Mario, we get to work with very, very high level athletes, top level bodybuilders, CrossFitters, even Olympic athletes. And so understanding what the goals are and why they're doing what they're doing is really paramount to any sort of way that I would approach BFR programming. Now, I think in general, in the fitness goer, right, that's just looking to implement BFR training into their routine, we advise in our courses the 80-20 rule, meaning that if you can lift, it's funny how life works out like this, right? Where 80-20 rule, it's moderation, right? You never want to diet 100% because then you go insane. But then you never want to, go and only diet, 50% of the time, because then what are you doing? So the same principle applies to BFR and fitness training. And so if you're healthy and you're able to lift heavy, you absolutely should be lifting heavy. You should be lifting moderate to heavy loads at least 80% of the time, because in reality, you're going to get the most benefit from lifting moderate to heavy weights than you will be for lifting lightweight BFR. Right. But that still leaves in the average person 20% of your volume in a regular routine, mind you, to be able to get some BFR exercise in. And why is that important? Well, people have to understand that there's a difference between what our brain is doing and our nervous system is doing when we recruit for moderate to heavy lifting than when we recruit for light load lifting like we're doing with BFR. And so we end up training not only the brain, but we also end up training our tendons, and we also end up training our bones when we use moderate to heavy loading, which we do not necessarily get to the same degree with light load training. And so even that in and of itself, along with the benefits of the nervous system recruitment. So when we recruit our muscle fibers, when we lift heavy, it's going to be a different pattern than when we lift light loads to failure. And so we get the change in actual skill performance, because when we lift heavy, it's actually a skill, believe it or not. And our body gets more efficient at being able to use that. But the only way that we actually develop this skill is by doing it repeatedly. And so when we're not injured, it's really important to maintain that throughout your program. And so the 20% on BFR could be used to offload your joints. So yes, moderate to heavy lifting is definitely something that you should be doing, but it's equally important to also consider long-term longevity, right? You want to be able to continue to lift and stay active for as long as you possibly can. So I give the example of Ronnie Coleman, right? I love Ronnie Coleman's physique, right? I think he was an absolute stud. He was a massive human being. But you know what? His training, he went balls to the wall, and he did heavy resistance training all the time. So what ended up happening to him? Because of the consistent resistance training, all the loading through the joints, he's now had, I think, 12 or 13 surgeries.
Jeez.
Like his back, his hips, his knees, like everything. Why? Because over time, even though load is important for adaptation, too much of anything is not good. Like if I like chocolate. I love chocolate. But if I continue to eat chocolate, I get fat. Right? There's consequences to everything that we do. And so while I'm a huge proponent of heavy lifting, when you're able to do that, for the numerous benefits that I just mentioned, I'm also a proponent of longevity and keeping people active. And so not many people, I mean, Ronnie Coleman, if you followed and you watched the recent Netflix documentary, like, he's still active. He still goes to the gym. He still does his thing. But Ronnie Coleman is an enigma. A lot of people, when they hurt, when they exercise, they don't want to exercise. So implementing that 20% BFR volume just allows you to promote your longevity in whatever you're going to be able to do. And that's just in general from a programming perspective, right? It could also go, the other area that I see people that you can integrate blood flow restriction in is in like deload weeks,
Correct.
right? Where you're training for a long period of time and you want to just give your joints a rest, right? But what we can do, because BFR, again, tricks the body into building muscle mass with lighter loads, is that you can use BFR during that 2-week period of time where you're doing your body weight squats, or you're really just reducing the load through your system to allow that recovery to occur. That's a really beneficial way that you can integrate BFR into a long-term program.
Correct.
Because remember, like, our muscles, a lot of people think that, they're going to rapidly atrophy without heavy lifting. And I just don't think that that's true. I think that if you're able to stimulate your muscle fibers, which, hundreds of thousands of muscle fibers compose of a single muscle, you're able to stimulate those muscle fibers when you're working to a level of fatigue, right? You're feeling that, what we call the colloquial lactic acid burn. When you feel that, you know that you're tapping into those fibers that are going to be the ones that are actually going to show growth, right? When you just exercise normally without it, you're never going to feel that lactic acid burn. You're never going to grow, and you're never going to challenge your body to adapt. And so we need to consistently promote stimuli that foster adaptation. And blood flow restriction is you're able to do that with very, very, very little loads. So that's where I see the majority of stuff in the healthy population to be able to do from a resistance training perspective. But then there's also the cardiovascular perspective as well. So you can also, we talk a lot about how BFR can improve muscle mass and strength. But in reality, it also, because of the stimuli where you're restricting blood flow to the arm or the leg, locally speaking, your mitochondria, which are, for people that can remember back to their cellular biology days, the powerhouse of the cell, they're responsible for energy metabolism. And when the mitochondria is stressed, well, what does that mean, right? Your body, if you're stressing a certain area of your body and you give it enough time to adapt, then we're going to adapt. And your body adapts to that by signaling for what we call mitochondrial biogenesis, or creation of new mitochondria, and allowing more of them to be around, so we become more efficient at utilizing oxygen. And so you can improve your aerobic capacity, or your VO2 max, right? With things like low load walking, right? It's crazy because you have people that walk at 30 to 40% of their heart rate reserve, which really is very little. I mean, that to me, I think is 116 beats per minute for me, is very little, but at the cellular level in the area distal to the cuff, now your cells are very stressed. And when we give them the chance to adapt, they're able to adapt. And that's why BFR is safe to use and really easy to use, as long as you stick within the framework of what's been shown to be safe. So definitely can use it for cardio, definitely can use it for resistance training. The applications are really cool, and and programming wise, from a health perspective, it changes based on how much load you're able to do. And so there's complexities associated with the relationship between muscle activation, so how much your muscle is actually able to be recruited, versus how much pressure you're applying to the limb, versus how much load you're actually lifting. So ideally, you want to lift the most amount of load with the least amount of pressure to be able to get a training effect, because the more that you can lift in terms of load perspective, the more you're able to then create that bridge between light to moderate lifting, which can then help you with the other facets of your athletic development. So there's intricacies that you can get into from the programming perspective from healthy individuals that can make a difference in the efficacy of what you're doing. And that's kind of what we get into when we talk through our course, is what other things that you can do to help optimize your workouts to get an effect that will allow you to recover quicker. Because remember, with BFR, because you're using lighter loads, there's actually not a lot of muscle damage that is occurring. And so without a lot of muscle damage, that reduces the degree of what we call central fatigue, which pretty much, just for our purposes in this conversation, just means that our ability to recover from an exercise bout. It reduces that duration, which allows you to potentially train a little bit more frequently than if you were going to use a heavier load, like a heavy back squat at 250 pounds versus a light back squat with 45 pounds of BFR. Like, your recoverability is going to be dramatically different between the heavy load versus the lighter load. And so that allows a lot more programming options for that individual.
Correct. I think you hit on some really good points, and I almost set you up to fail with the way I phrased the question, but it's so true. And I think people think it's as simple as, people always want an A to B answer. It's never that clear. And it always goes down to, what are your goals? Because the way you program BFR into your program is going to look so different between person A and person B, because those goals may be different. Not only may the goals be different, but your general program may be different. They may be on, a 4-day-a-week program. Someone else may be in a 4-day-a-week, versus a 2-day-a-week program. And then it looks completely different how you're implementing BFR into your programming. But love what you said. The main reasons hitting it, the deload week for the average person is good. I know for me, my deload week comes on accident. I just get busy with life. I get in the gym. But if I was more consistent, with my training, that would be a really, really good use of BFR for myself, for the reasons that you mentioned. And then I hate training aerobically. I barely do any. I know how important aerobic fitness is, for general health. So the times that I do want to train, I want to train as little as possible. So that's the times that I know I'll do BFR for myself. I'd rather spend 15, 20 minutes on a bike than a whole hour on the bike, for that couple times that I do train aerobically.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really cool stuff that's coming out that we're piloting right now that involves, what I call Pillar 4, or return to sport applications for BFR, because when you're healthy now, you can use BFR to help either with intermittent in terms of high intensity interval work, and you can also use it as like the end stages of rehab, whereby if you're dealing with an individual with an ACL tear, and you want to do return to sport testing, but you want to see how do they look in the fourth quarter of a basketball game or the second half of a soccer game. Well, what you can do then is you can use BFR as a pre-fatigue stimulus to then drive the testing, and you can see what do they look like under fatigue in a controlled situation. So that when you work to volitional fatigue with BFR, you're going to get a sharp drop in the MVC, or the maximum voluntary contraction of that muscle, that may last. Again, it depends on the degree of how much volume you're doing to failure, but it will last a variety of time. But typically speaking, you're going to get at least an hour of depressed muscle recruitment, which can simulate very fatiguing exercise like you're doing at the end of a sport competition. So you can see how do their knee alignment look when they're squatting, or when they're cutting, or when they're sprinting or changing directions. And so that's where BFR can fit in at the end stages of rehab to bridge back to performance, is in that realm. And then you obviously have the high intensity interval applications that come from looking at some of the more in-depth physiology and how our physiology responds to factors such as the reperfusion. So when the blood comes back in, that then sets a whole host of reactions that end up creating a more resilient mitochondria and cell at large to defend against muscle damage as well as fatigue. So you're able to then utilize this BFR and program it accordingly to be able to optimize your physiology when you're healthy as well. So there's tons of cool stuff out there on the that really hasn't been talked about too much, but now that we're ready to start to broach the conversation of healthy use of BFR in healthy individuals, I think that this conversation is now going to continue to move forward as we start to talk more and more about this and publicize more and more about the benefits of utilizing BFR in healthy individuals.
Yeah,
so.
I love it. The intermittent use that you touched on, I don't know if many people are familiar with it. So most of the time, guys, when we're talking about BFR training or other things, it's what we're going to term as a continuous use of BFR, meaning we pump it up to a certain relative pressure. We'll just call it 100 millimeters of mercury, and then it stays at that point for the duration of the exercise. And then we are letting the pressure out and letting what's known as free flow happen before pumping the pressure back up again and exercising. With this intermittent use, you're basically pumping it up for a certain duration of time, letting it out and going through cycles of it. And that can be either passively or that's even done, like you kind of alluded to on a lot of the aerobic side, or you're talking about during the rest breaks during high intensity interval training. Is that correct?
Honestly, there are a couple different applications that you can use depending on what your goals are. So that's where part of our performance course is going, is we've been piloting some of this stuff with our athletes and clients as well as ourselves and looking at mirroring what the research is. And so it really just depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to improve your absolute, aerobic capacity? Are you trying to improve your average workload? Are you trying to improve your time to fatigue, and then it's fitting the application to the goal. So it circles back again to what is your goal and how can we utilize this technology to help you achieve your goal. So that's the most important question when it comes to anything that I do from a clinical or performance side is what's the goal? What are the adaptations that you need to achieve in order to get that goal? And then how can I help bridge that with the technology or with, programming or whatever that we have available. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can apply it. Most typically it's BFR, BFR used during the exercise and then deflated during the rest period. But there are also studies that have shown in benefit to having BFR on during the rest period, but not during the exercise itself. So it really just, again, depends on what's your application and what's the goal.
Right. Let's do this to give people a little bit more of a concrete idea. So say we talked about the regular fitness enthusiasts already and how they maybe use it based on what their program looks like or based on what their goals. I guess let's get a little bit more specific and say someone's a CrossFit athlete. They're competing and they want to work on, for most of these CrossFit athletes, time to fatigue or ability to be able to perform at their certain output for a longer period of time or a faster period of time. Say that was someone's goal. And then how would that individual, that healthy individual, that CrossFit athlete who doesn't have any previous, injuries or any other medical conditions that would preclude them from using blood flow restriction training, how would they go ahead and use it to improve their performance when it comes to something as specific as CrossFit?
Practically versus, theory are two different things. For me, I would start off everybody by trying to build up what we call tolerance to time under hypoxia, or TUH. So ideally, if they're able to build up a tolerance of 20 minutes of time under hypoxia at the targeted prescription of anywhere from 30 to 45% of the heart rate reserve, which is, again, pretty difficult to do once you start to get tired. Then we can start to figure out what are ways to even further optimize their program. So typically a lot of people are going to be stuck And when I say stuck, I just mean that's their prescription. They're not going to go any higher than this until they're able to get that TUH at around 20 minutes of 45% of the heart rate reserve. Because again, you can increase the intensity, and that's great, because we already know that it appears to be that, with aerobic training, that because there's no metabolite accumulation, there is other processes that are driving the adaptations that appear to be hypoxia related, meaning that we're reducing the blood flow to the area, and that's going to help drive some of the local mediators of the processes that we're looking for. So like improvement in mitochondrial function, improvement in our ability to distribute nutrients. So creating new capillaries, which are just very small arteries, and doing so from that perspective. Once we have those new capillaries and once we have those rebooted mitochondria, that again, you can get at a very low intensity. You don't need to create more intensity, like from a exertional perspective, to get that benefit. You can start at the bottom, work your way up, and once you've cleared that, then we can start to progress toward more high intensity work that pairs, intense aerobic exercise with BFR. But a lot of the people, they're just listening. The goal should be to try to work toward a continuous 20 minutes of 40 to 45% of the heart rate reserve, which you can just find that formula online. Mm-hmm. It's not worth getting into on this discussion here, but work there, and then you can start to think about how can I optimize the protocol even more, because even though you're working at a low intensity, if you have the machinery to be able to tolerate higher intensity exercise, you're going to be able to work at a relatively higher intensity without the same amount of fatigue or effort that it would take prior. So it's almost like you become more efficient at whatever relative intensity that you were at, so you can bump up to a higher intensity and work at that same workload, if that makes sense.
Now that the 10 mile mark is now how you're feeling at the 12 mile mark is an easy way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Capacities.
Exactly. So you're able to improve your capacity, and then once you're able to improve your capacity, then I start to think about performance. It's not the wisest decision to think about optimizing your performance if you don't have enough capacity in the first place.
Correct.
So that's why it's hitting these baseline measures of resistance training BFR. So being able to tolerate, a 30, 15, 15, 15 with, honestly, if anybody's really tried to do a back squat, like a true back squat with even 10% of their 1 rep max in their back squat, that to me is the marker that I kind of use for programming and progressing even further into BFR with other novel techniques. Is can they do a back squat 10% of their 1 rep max, 30, 15, 15, 15, and be able to still, complete the protocol. And then same thing with cardiovascular is can they walk 20 minutes at 45% of the heart rate reserve, and still, not have to use the handlebars, for example, or, offload their weight, and make sure that they can tolerate that before I start to think of, all right, I'm going to program a little bit higher intensity work in there. Now, obviously there are athletes there that are already there that I might, on the basis of practicality, progress them a little bit quicker. But the vast majority of people that would listen to this would be just fine with starting to build up tolerance to BFR, resistance training and aerobic training in the ways that I just mentioned.
Yeah, and for those of you guys that haven't tried BFR before, maybe you have, I think if you have tried, you'll understand how hard that is. If you've tried to put, 2 BFR cuffs on your legs and just do body weight squats, that'll tax probably 90% of the people out there. And that's not even with any external load on their person. Same thing with the aerobic. Going a whole 15, 20 minutes, it is extremely, extremely, extremely tough. Build up the capacity to just that time under hypoxia first before even thinking about, different creative ways to integrate it within your programming, because it's so important to have that baseline that reserve, I guess you can call it, before even thinking about how to optimize it even further. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I could be listening to this podcast, 5 years from now, and be like, listen, maybe I was off the mark, and new evidence is showing, like for me, the thing that I'm thinking about is the reperfusion. Like, is it the actual time under hypoxia, or is it the reperfusion? And right now we just don't have enough data to suggest that it's the reperfusion, meaning that when we release the cuff and the blood comes back in, that kind of drives some of the local adaptations, not necessarily the hypoxia in general. But I think that whether or not that's completely true or not, and again, only research will help us understand that question even more, that developing a tolerance to low oxygen environments is going to be beneficial for your mitochondria. I mean, that's how we know that for sure. It's just a matter of how low do we need to go. And that's where I think that the majority of my practice now, especially when we're talking about healthy individuals, is actually gravitating towards 60% of the LOP, limb occlusion pressure in the legs, and 50 to 60% in the arms. Again, it depends on the individual. I tend to stick more toward 50%, but if I use wider cuffs, I might use a little bit greater of pressure, but narrower cuffs, I tend to use 50%. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where the sweet spot is headed right now. If you're going to program on the spot, 60% tends to be the nice sweet spot, because that decreases the oxygen availability in our blood. Pretty much our muscles can actually absorb a lot of oxygen at 60%. But then when we go up toward 80%, which is clinically important when we can't lift any weight, right? Because increased pressure will increase the amount of muscle activation that we're doing at any given rep, which is important when we're injured. But when we're not injured, we actually don't need that high of a pressure. It doesn't seem to me that 80% is actually relevant at all once we're able to lift something like 20 to 25% of the 1RM. When we're able to do that, then we can scale back the pressure. Mm-hmm. And it actually makes it a little bit more comfortable, more tolerable to the individual, and we're able to get similar benefits.
Yeah, and we're able to make that transition, like you said. If people can high intensity train, we want to be there for the other numerous benefits beyond just the muscle itself.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's a really good point to make. Well, let's see. That was super helpful, Nick. That was some concrete advice for anyone out there listening, seeing how they can implement BFR into their practice. I guess we'll kind of do a broad overview, a review of that again. So we kind of broke it down into 3 different areas. I think we started with the Ronnie Coleman example, or a bodybuilder, right? Cutting down the total volume in their training, and being able to, I guess we can all say from a physique perspective, isolate certain muscle groups that maybe someone from a physique or bodybuilder perspective may want to be hitting. So that was our kind of a first example that we talked about. And feel free to chime in at any point. Then we have our second example. We kind of moved over to just our general fitness individual population, the person who's maybe doing some resistance training, some aerobic training at 24-hour, at the gym, and using it. One of 2 options is either using it kind of as a deload week. So every 2 months or so, giving yourself a week off, letting your system kind of reboot so you don't get centrally fatigued, using it as a deload week with these light loads, and or for the aerobic, your aerobic trained person, using BFR to stress your system a little bit more to a greater degree, but with a lot less time to do so. So that was our fitness kind of enthusiast. And then we have from a CrossFit, and now we're going to come and talk about performance. And we just mentioned CrossFit. This could be anything in performance. This could be your pro cyclist. This could be your pro swimmer, your triathlete, whatever it may be. Making sure that they have the adequate reserve first, so that they can tolerate that time under hypoxia first, because that is, like we said, for those of you that have tried BFR, that is so hard already to do. Making sure they have that reserve first before then getting into the nitty-gritty of how can we utilize BFR within their existing programming. Is there anything else you wanted to add to the kind of those 3 general examples that we kind of covered?
No, I mean, that sounds good. I think I think it's just really important to understand that this is a gradual process, and then you can see very significant results pretty quick with the integration of BFR due to everything that we just talked about. And it's just something that it doesn't replace heavy lifting. That's really important to acknowledge, because a lot of people are thinking that BFR is this panacea that is going to solve, everything, all the problems that you have in the human body. And that's just simply not true. It's another way that you can exercise that can reduce the volume needed to reach, to reach failure or get a significant training effect with lighter loads. And that will then translate into reduced forces through our joints and allow us to promote our longevity in our ability to stay active. So that's the takeaway there. And then same thing with athletics is important to consider in season training as well. Like you don't want to have an athlete. You can have an athlete back squat 410 pounds, once, twice a week to maintain their strength, because that's been shown to be effective. Jeremy Lenneke's research on strength snacks, meaning periodic 1RM attempts can maintain your strength just as much as higher volume work. But it's one of those things where it's a risk versus reward, right? Everything, especially when you're talking about performance, is risk versus reward. What is the risk to the athlete? What is the benefit or the reward as a result of the decision that you're going to make? And so if you're able to maximize the reward or benefit and minimize the risk with something like, a periodic BFR throughout the season to maintain muscle mass and strength, it's important to give that some thought for those that are thinking about, BFR could be used, but my athletes are always tired or they don't have enough time because of travel. Well, The beautiful thing about about BFR is you don't need that much equipment. I literally give BFR cuffs and a TheraBand for a lot of my clients, because that's all that they need, because you can create a significant training effect with just a TheraBand, which is awesome.
Crazy. It's crazy. It gives you a new perspective on what a TheraBand resistance can actually do. Let's look at the little yellow band a little bit differently now.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time, Nick. Where can people find you on social media, website, location as well, in case anyone else has any other questions or wants to come see you in person?
Sure. Me personally, I'm located in Midtown Manhattan, at 370 Lexington Avenue. So it's right across the street from Grand Central. So if anybody is local and wants to get some BFR training in, I would love to be able to help you out with that. My Instagram account probably has, and I'm just saying this because I'm pretty sure it does, has the most comprehensive blood flow restriction resource on the internet. And you follow my account, so you probably can attest.
Oh yeah, great stuff.
That I've covered pretty much everything involving BFR that at least I want public knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's there, and my Instagram is THEHPM. So it stands for The Human Performance Mechanic. And then obviously, you can find me with my partner Mario, the BFR Pros, thebfrpros.com, the BFR Pros on Instagram. We're about to launch our international teaching schedule. So if you're around the country, around the world, then we are going to have you covered. And it's going to be on fitness and performance application as well with BFR. So we'll get a little bit more into this topic and get people moving, keep them moving, and help them experience the joy of pain-free movement, which is my goal. So super exciting.
Heck yeah. BFR on the cusp, already there on the cusp, I would say, in the rehab setting, and now working its way into the performance setting and average fitness setting. Nick, appreciate your time. Have a good rest of the day. I hope you guys got some cool ideas of how to use BFR if you are currently healthy and not actually in rehab. Now, what I like to tell people is that there really is no right or wrong when you use it. You have to think of the why. With anything in programming, you have to think of why am I using it, and is this the best use of an apparatus or tool like BFR for someone's programming. But if you guys have any questions, drop us a comment. You can also reach out to Nick at the HPM, which you mentioned, and hope you guys enjoy this. If you're interested in taking a BFR course with us, we have courses all over the United States through Smart Tools. We teach BFR Level 1 courses right now, which are primarily in the rehab setting. Reach out to us if you have any questions.